For decades, crossing into the U.S. was second nature for Canadians. No visas, no headaches, just open roads and friendly smiles. It felt almost like visiting a neighbor, a simple, uncomplicated process built on years of mutual trust and understanding. The longest land border in the world was often seen more as a formality than a barrier. Families planned cross-border shopping trips without a second thought. Businesses thrived on the easy flow of people and goods, and vacations down south were a common occurrence for many. This ease of movement fostered deep economic and cultural ties, making the relationship between the two nations uniquely intertwined. The notion of needing extensive paperwork or facing significant hurdles seemed foreign, a problem for travelers from other parts of the world, not for Canadians heading to the States. But in 2025, something feels different. Fingerprints at the border, phones being searched, longer questions, colder looks. The easy, automatic trust we once had is slipping away, and most Canadians don't even realize it yet. The subtle shifts in procedure and atmosphere are creating an undercurrent of unease. What was once a quick wave-through might now involve secondary screening. The casual chat with a border officer could turn into a more probing interview. The digital devices you carry, once considered personal, are now potentially subject to inspection without clear cause. This change isn't loud or abrupt for everyone, but it's pervasive, altering the very feel of the border crossing experience. The friendly smiles might still be there, but they seem accompanied by a new layer of scrutiny, a questioning gaze that wasn't present before. Is this just tighter security, a necessary response to global events? Or is it a quiet signal that Canadians are no longer truly welcome, that the relationship is fundamentally changing? The world has seen numerous significant events unfold recently, impacting global politics, economies, and travel. From geopolitical shifts to evolving security measures, the landscape is constantly changing. Today, we're diving deep into the specific changes affecting travel between Canada and the United States, focusing on what Canadians need to know before they head south in 2025. We'll explore the new rules, the increased scrutiny, and the growing concerns voiced by travelers, experts, and even academic institutions. These aren't just minor inconveniences. They represent a potentially significant shift in the long-standing relationship between the two countries, particularly as experienced at the border. We encourage you to stay with us as we unpack these developments. Your support is crucial for our channel to continue bringing you important updates like these. Please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It truly helps us grow and reach a wider audience. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the globe. Stick around, because what's happening at the border now might change the way you travel forever. We'll be examining the evidence and presenting conclusions at the end of this video. The 30-day rule surprise marks a significant departure from previous norms. For years, the established practice allowed Canadians, particularly the affectionately termed snowbirds escaping harsh winters, to stay in the United States for up to 6 months, without the burden of visas or complex paperwork. This generous time frame facilitated extended vacations, family visits, and property management for those owning second homes in warmer climates. The process was largely seamless, requiring minimal interaction beyond standard border checks. This long-standing 6-month allowance was a cornerstone of the perceived special relationship, reflecting a high degree of trust and facilitating significant cross-border tourism and economic activity. Canadians planned their extended stays with confidence, knowing the rules were stable and accommodating. It was a system that worked well for decades, reinforcing the idea of an open and welcoming border for leisure travelers. However, in 2025, everything changed. The once simple process of crossing the U.S. border has started to get complicated, especially for Canadian snowbirds and other long-term visitors. The new rule now limits Canadians to just 30 days, a drastic reduction from the previous 6-month period. To stay longer, individuals must now navigate a new requirement: registering with U.S. immigration authorities online before their stay begins. This policy shift, while presented as part of a broader effort to track long-term visitors more effectively, has caught many Canadians completely off guard. The abrupt change disrupts long-established travel patterns and introduces a bureaucratic hurdle that didn't exist before. The rationale of tracking visitors might be valid from a security perspective, but the implementation has caused significant confusion and anxiety among those accustomed to the former ease of access. The lack of widespread awareness about this 30-day limit is particularly problematic. The problem is, most Canadians don't even know this rule exists. There hasn't been a large-scale, effective communication campaign to inform the public about such a fundamental change. Immigration lawyers are reporting a huge spike in confusion, fielding calls from bewildered clients who suddenly find their travel plans upended. Snowbird organizations, representing the large demographic most affected by this change, are actively pushing for exemptions or modifications, arguing that the 30-day limit is impractical and detrimental to the established lifestyles of many Canadians who spend winters in the U.S. These organizations highlight the economic contributions snowbirds make to U.S. communities and the long history of uncomplicated extended stays. The suddenness and lack of clarity surrounding the rule have created a sense of uncertainty, leaving many wondering about the future of their cross-border arrangements and the underlying reasons for such a restrictive policy shift. Already, travelers have started getting warnings at the border, encountering officers who inform them of the new 30-day limit, sometimes only after they've already planned a longer stay. Many are realizing, often uncomfortably close to their travel dates, that they can no longer stay as long as they want without facing potential complications. The implications range from needing to cut trips short to potentially facing penalties or future entry issues if they overstay the 30-day period without proper online registration. Statistics. Canada data underscores the impact. The agency reported a nearly 32% drop in vehicle re-entries from the U.S. in March 2025 compared to the previous year. While multiple factors can influence travel numbers, this sharp decline coincides with the introduction and growing awareness of the new restrictions and the general unease surrounding border crossings. It suggests that the changes are actively deterring Canadians from making the trip south. It's not just about a form, it's about a shift in how Canadians are viewed at the border. What used to feel like a smooth, effortless experience now feels like a test. The underlying assumption of welcome seems to have been replaced by an atmosphere of suspicion. Are you really welcome, or just tolerated? This subtle but significant change is causing many to rethink their travel plans and wonder, when did this border stop feeling like home? The psychological impact of feeling scrutinized, of needing explicit permission for longer stays through online registration, alters the perception of the U.S. as a readily accessible and friendly destination. It introduces friction into a relationship previously characterized by its fluidity. The need to prove legitimacy, even for routine travel, suggests a fundamental change in perspective from the U.S. side, leaving Canadians questioning the future nature of cross-border interactions and the trust that once defined them. Please, remember to watch this video until the very end, as we will be summarizing our findings and offering concluding thoughts on these significant developments. Your phone is no longer private. This represents another stark change in the border crossing experience. It used to be that crossing the U.S. border was a simple process. You'd show your passport, answer a couple of routine questions about your trip's purpose and duration, and you were on your way. Personal electronic devices like phones and laptops remain just that, personal. The idea of a border agent demanding to search through your private messages, photos, or browsing history seemed improbable, reserved for extreme circumstances or high-level security threats, not routine crossings. This expectation of privacy was deeply ingrained, reflecting the general legal principles respected within both countries regarding personal property and communications. Travelers carried their devices without fear of arbitrary intrusion, confident that their digital lives were their own business unless specific, targeted suspicion arose. But in 2025, things have taken a more invasive turn. Now, when Canadians arrive at the border, they're increasingly being asked to hand over their phones, laptops, and other personal devices. U.S. border agents have the legal right, established through court rulings and policy interpretations specific to border zones, to search through these devices without a warrant. This authority is broad and often exercised without the traveler needing to exhibit any suspicious behavior. They can scroll through messages, look at photos, examine browser history, and even check your social media accounts. This practice stems from the legal doctrine that grants government authorities greater search powers at international borders for national security purposes. However, the application of this power to routine travelers, particularly from a close ally like Canada, feels like a significant overreach to many. And you have no right to refuse. Refusal to comply with a request to search your electronic devices at the U.S. border can lead to consequences ranging from denial of entry to seizure of the device itself. This leaves travelers in a vulnerable position, forced to choose between protecting their privacy and gaining entry into the country. This new policy has raised serious concerns, especially after reports surfaced showing Canadians being flagged or even denied entry based on things like political views or personal opinions found on their devices. Even harmless old memes or jokes from years ago, taken out of context or misinterpreted, could now potentially be grounds for suspicion. The subjective nature of what constitutes suspicious content, combined with the lack of oversight or clear guidelines, creates an environment ripe for potential misuse and discriminatory application. The most unsettling part is that there's no transparency in these searches. Travelers are rarely, if ever, told why their devices are being searched or what specifically agents are looking for. The Canadian government has even started warning travelers to expect these digital searches at the U.S. border, advising them that there is often no clear cause provided and no requirement for an explanation from U.S. authorities. It's not targeted. It's broad and invasive. The personal data you once thought was private is now potentially exposed every time you approach the border. The fear is real. What was once a quick and easy border crossing now feels like an open door for authorities to dig into your digital life, with no clear boundaries and no way of knowing if or when that information could be used against you. The shift transforms the border from a simple point of entry into a potential site of intense personal scrutiny. It's a level of scrutiny that many Canadians never expected from their closest neighbor and ally. This practice transforms the border crossing experience from a simple journey into something resembling an interrogation. The focus shifts from verifying identity and travel purpose to potentially examining the traveler's thoughts, beliefs, and associations as revealed through their digital footprint. This creates a chilling effect, where individuals may feel compelled to self-censor or alter their online behavior for fear of repercussions at the border. The lack of clear justification for searches and the absence of recourse, if information is misinterpreted or misused, further exacerbate the feeling of vulnerability. It fundamentally alters the relationship dynamic, replacing assumed trust with implicit suspicion, and making many Canadians question the value and safety of traveling to the U.S. under these new conditions. Academic travel warnings signal another layer of complexity and concern. In 2025, it wasn't just the Canadian government raising alarms about crossing the U.S. border. One of the country's most trusted academic institutions weighed in as well, indicating the breadth and depth of the issue. The Canadian Association of University Teachers, or CAUT, which represents over 72,000 professors and researchers across the nation, took the highly unusual step of issuing a rare travel advisory against visiting the United States. CAUT is a respected body known for advocating academic freedom and the interests of university staff. Such an advisory is not issued lightly and reflects serious concerns about the safety and treatment of its members when traveling to the U.S. for professional reasons. This wasn't a vague warning. It was a direct call for faculty members to reconsider travel to the U.S., especially if they were transgender, racialized, politically outspoken, or belonged to any other marginalized group. The specificity of the warning highlighted concerns about targeted harassment and discrimination at the border. The reason for this warning? A disturbing trend of harassment, invasive questioning, and unexplained detentions at the U.S. border targeting these specific groups. Reports had accumulated detailing incidents where academics faced undue scrutiny, prolonged questioning about their research or personal beliefs, and even temporary detentions without clear justification, seemingly based on their identity or perceived political leanings. This created an environment where academic freedom and personal safety felt compromised simply by attempting to enter the U.S. for conferences, research collaborations, or other scholarly activities. The advisory wasn't just about academic travel anxiety. It was about protection. It urged Canadians, particularly those in potentially targeted groups, to take precautions such as wiping their phones of sensitive personal or research data before traveling, limiting the amount of personal information carried on devices, and being prepared to be flagged at the border, not necessarily for what they carry, but for who they are. This advice underscores the perceived risk and the breakdown of trust. The fact that an organization dedicated to higher education felt compelled to issue such specific warnings speaks volumes about the perceived climate at the U.S. border and its potential impact on the free exchange of ideas and people. This wasn't an isolated issue or a few anecdotal reports. It was identified as a growing pattern that had left many feeling unsafe and vulnerable when considering professional travel to the U.S. As a result, many universities across Canada began updating their own travel protocols in response to the CAUT advisory and broader concerns. Legal departments within universities started stepping in to offer guidance and workshops for faculty and staff planning U.S. travel, advising them on their rights or lack thereof at the border and suggesting protective measures. The potential for harassment, data seizure, or denial of entry based on identity or academic work became a tangible concern, influencing institutional policies and individual travel decisions. Conferences and academic events in places like Boston, Chicago, or New York, which were once routine destinations for Canadian scholars, started being quietly skipped or questioned by potential attendees. The decision-making process for attending professional gatherings in the U.S. now included a risk assessment that went beyond logistical considerations. Faculty members, especially those from marginalized groups or working in sensitive research areas, had to weigh the professional benefits against the personal risks of encountering difficulties at the border. The fact that professors, researchers, and other academic professionals are reconsidering U.S. travel is a warning sign that goes beyond just personal inconvenience. It highlights how the changing border environment is beginning to erode the very foundations of academic exchange and collaboration. When an institution as reputable as the Canadian Association of University Teachers tells its members to think twice about traveling to the U.S., it speaks volumes about the broader atmosphere at the border. This shift is not just impacting tourism or leisure travel, it's starting to affect the very essence of academic exchange, which has historically been a cornerstone of cross-border relationships between Canada and the U.S. The free flow of knowledge, research collaboration, and participation in the international academic community are potentially being hindered by these perceived risks and the resulting hesitancy to travel. This chilling effect on academic mobility has implications not only for individual researchers and institutions, but also for the broader intellectual and scientific partnership between the two nations. The silent pullback represents a subtle but significant trend. Sometimes the most telling signs of change aren't the loud headlines or big policy shifts. They're the subtle shifts that happen quietly, behind the scenes, reflecting individual choices accumulating into a larger pattern. In 2025, Canadians are starting to pull back from the U.S. without anyone explicitly noticing or coordinating a large-scale action. It's not a full-blown boycott or protest, but a slow, quiet retreat that's starting to make waves in border towns and tourist destinations that rely heavily on Canadian visitors. This gradual withdrawal stems from the accumulation of the previously discussed concerns. The tighter rules, the invasive searches, the feeling of unwelcome, and the fear of arbitrary treatment. In early 2025, data showed a notable 23% decline in Canadian visits to the U.S. compared to the previous year. While travel statistics fluctuate, this significant drop aligns with the growing unease. Fewer cars are crossing the border for casual trips. Fewer hotel bookings are being made by Canadians, and fewer Canadians are showing up to spend money or enjoy a weekend getaway in traditional U.S. destinations. Businesses in border towns in states like Maine, Michigan, Vermont, New York, and Washington, along with other regions that heavily rely on Canadian tourism, have noticed the shift. They are experiencing a tangible decrease in Canadian customers. impacting local economies that have long benefited from this cross-border traffic. One motel owner in Old Orchard Beach, Maine, a popular spot for Quebecois vacationers, put it simply, "We're seeing cancellations we haven't seen in years, and it's all Canadians." This sentiment is echoed by other business owners in similar locations. It's not that Canadians are necessarily angry in a way that leads to organized protest. Rather, they're just uneasy. They feel uncertain about crossing the border, worried about being searched, delayed, or flagged without cause. The predictability and ease that once characterized these trips have evaporated, replaced by a sense of potential hassle or even risk. What used to be an easy day trip for shopping or sightseeing now feels like it requires a cost-benefit analysis that increasingly tilts towards staying home or traveling elsewhere. The fact that this hesitation is happening on such a large scale, reflected in both statistics and anecdotal evidence from businesses, is significant. It's a sign that something deeper is changing in the perception of the U.S. among ordinary Canadians. The automatic, unquestioned welcome Canadians once felt at the border is slipping away, replaced by caution and apprehension. Tour operators and travel agencies along the Quebec and Ontario borders are also noticing this quiet pullback. They report fewer inquiries for U.S. trips and more customers opting for domestic travel or destinations perceived as less problematic. This collective, uncoordinated shift in behavior underscores a fundamental change in how the border, and by extension the U.S. itself, is being viewed by its northern neighbors. This isn't just about fewer people coming into the U.S., it's about a growing sense that the relationship between Canada and the U.S. is no longer as friendly or as open as it used to be, at least from the perspective of the individual traveler at the point of entry. When everyday Canadians start questioning whether they should even make the trip for leisure or routine visits, it's more than just a change in travel habits. It's a sign that the bond between the two countries, long characterized by its ease and familiarity, is beginning to feel more strained and less certain. The cumulative effect of these individual decisions, driven by shared concerns, paints a picture of a relationship subtly fraying at its most tangible interface, the border itself. Unequal scrutiny at the border is perhaps one of the most troubling changes observed in 2025. While border security has always involved some level of questioning or inspection for all travelers, reports are emerging that show a clear bias in how individuals are treated, seemingly based on their identity or background, rather than any specific actionable intelligence. This growing pattern of unequal scrutiny faced by certain groups of Canadians represents a significant departure from the principle of fair and impartial treatment expected at the border between two closely allied democratic nations. The concern is that factors unrelated to genuine security risks, such as ethnicity, religion, or perceived political views, are influencing the level of scrutiny applied. Specifically, Canadians with Middle Eastern names, those with South Asian backgrounds, or individuals who identify as Muslim are increasingly facing more invasive searches, longer interviews, and deeper scrutiny than other travelers. This disparate treatment occurs despite these individuals presenting valid travel documents and having no prior history of border issues. Border agents are often asking probing questions about personal beliefs, religious practices, political views, associations, and travel intentions that seem to go far beyond standard security protocols. The scrutiny feels disproportionate and targeted, leading to feelings of humiliation, frustration, and alienation among those subjected to it. This pattern suggests a form of profiling, whether implicit or explicit, is influencing border operations. This isn't part of any official policy. There's no public announcement, no press release acknowledging such practices. Yet, it's happening consistently enough to be recognized as a pattern by travelers, advocacy groups, and legal experts. Civil rights groups and legal advocates on both sides of the border have raised serious concerns about this growing trend. They argue that such practices are discriminatory, counterproductive to genuine security efforts, and damaging to the fundamental rights and dignity of travelers. And yet, there's no clear way to address it. Because it's not codified in official policy, challenging it becomes difficult. Travelers subjected to this treatment are often left with no explanation for why they were targeted in the first place. The lack of transparency compounds the problem. Without knowing why they are being subjected to heightened scrutiny, individuals cannot effectively challenge the treatment or seek redress. This ambiguity creates a climate of fear and uncertainty, particularly for members of communities who feel they are being unfairly targeted. It's not just about being questioned more intensely, it's about the feeling of being singled out without any reasonable cause, based solely on one's name, origin, or faith. For many Canadians, the experience isn't just about border security anymore. It's about being treated like an outsider, like someone who doesn't belong, simply because of their background. The shift in treatment at the border has had a deep psychological effect on these communities. This experience creates a sense of fear and discomfort among certain groups that wasn't there before. The border, which should ideally be a neutral point of passage, becomes a site of potential discrimination and stress. This trend isn't affecting just a small number of travelers. It's something that more and more people within specific communities are experiencing or hearing about, leading to a collective sense of apprehension. It further erodes the notion of an open and welcoming border, replacing it with the perception of a checkpoint where one's identity might invite unwarranted suspicion. This form of silent discrimination, though subtle to outsiders, is deeply unsettling for those who face it, fundamentally altering their view of the U.S. and their willingness to travel there. The concept of being once flagged, always flagged, introduces a particularly persistent form of anxiety for Canadians crossing the U.S. border in 2025. This phenomenon describes the experience where, once an individual has been stopped, subjected to secondary screening, questioned extensively, or even denied entry for reasons that were often never fully explained, they find themselves treated differently on every subsequent border crossing. It's not about a formal, acknowledged watch list or a clear policy change, but rather an enduring, seemingly invisible record within the border system that perpetually marks them for heightened attention. Many Canadians report this experience, noting that even years later, despite having new paperwork, updated visas, or a completely clean travel record since the initial incident, they are consistently pulled aside for extra checks. Travelers who have been flagged once, perhaps due to a random check that escalated, a misunderstanding, or even based on the previously discussed unequal scrutiny, now find themselves stopped more frequently. Every trip across the border becomes fraught with the possibility of delay and intrusive questioning, regardless of the current purpose of travel or the passage of time. It's as if the border system has a long memory, and once you've been marked, you're never fully in the clear again. This creates a feeling of being trapped in an endless cycle of suspicion and uncertainty. The original reason for being flagged might be unknown or unjustified, yet the consequence, persistent scrutiny, endures indefinitely. The worst part is the opacity surrounding this process. Travelers often have no idea what caused the original flagging. Was it something they said? Something found on their device during a search? A case of mistaken identity? An association with someone else? Or simply belonging to a group subjected to unequal scrutiny? There's usually no way to find out what triggered the extra attention, and consequently, no way to formally challenge it or clear their name. This lack of transparency and recourse leaves individuals feeling powerless and perpetually under suspicion without cause. For many, this creates a feeling of being unfairly penalized for an unknown or arbitrary reason. This ongoing surveillance and the lack of closure mean that some Canadians are now facing a future where their every border crossing feels like a renewed interrogation. What was once a simple, straightforward journey has turned into a reminder that the system remembers you, judges you based on a past interaction, even if you've done nothing wrong since. The Canadian government itself has warned travelers that U.S. border decisions are typically final, with no established appeals process, and that the reasons behind these decisions are often not explained. This reinforces the sense of finality and inescapability for those who find themselves caught in this flagged status. For those affected, it can feel like the U.S. border has become a place of constant anxiety. The anticipation of being pulled aside, the uncertainty of how long the delay will be, the discomfort of repetitive questioning, all contribute to a stressful and unpleasant travel experience. It's more than just an inconvenience. It's a persistent psychological burden. This phenomenon isn't just about more thorough questioning. It's about the enduring consequence of a single incident, creating a heavy, unsettling feeling that is becoming the new reality for an increasing number of Canadians attempting to cross the U.S. border. It fundamentally changes the nature of the crossing from a routine act to a potentially recurring ordeal. As we've seen, the U.S.-Canada border in 2025 isn't what it used to be. The landscape has shifted significantly, moving away from an era of easy passage and implicit trust towards one characterized by increased regulation, heightened scrutiny, and growing unease for many Canadian travelers. What was once a seamless, friendly crossing, often described as the longest undefended border in the world, symbolizing a unique relationship, has turned into a place of uncertainty and discomfort for many. The changes, while perhaps implemented under the guise of enhanced security, are having profound effects on individuals, communities, and the very perception of the relationship between the two nations. From the tighter rules, such as the surprising 30-day limit replacing the generous 6-month stay for visitors like snowbirds, requiring proactive online registration, to the invasive searches of personal electronic devices like phones and laptops without warrants or clear cause, the experience has become more complex and intrusive. Adding to this are the academic travel warnings issued by respected institutions like CAUT, advising caution, particularly for marginalized groups, due to patterns of harassment and unexplained detentions. These institutional warnings reflect a broader concern that extends beyond individual travelers. Furthermore, we've observed the phenomenon of unequal scrutiny, where Canadians from specific ethnic or religious backgrounds report facing disproportionately intense questioning and searches, suggesting a troubling pattern of profiling. Compounding these issues is the persistent nature of being flagged. Once subjected to extra scrutiny, travelers often find themselves marked indefinitely, facing repeated delays and questioning on subsequent trips without explanation or recourse. The unsettling reality of once flagged, always flagged. The cumulative impact of these factors is evident in the silent pullback, where declining travel numbers and anecdotal reports from border businesses indicate a growing reluctance among Canadians to make the trip south due to the perceived hassles and risks. The real question now is, are Canadians still truly welcome in the U.S. in the way they once were? The open road and friendly smiles seem to be fading, replaced by fingerprints, phone searches, probing questions, and a general atmosphere of suspicion for many. The automatic, unquestioned welcome that characterized the border for decades appears to be eroding. While security concerns are a global reality, the way these measures are being implemented at the U.S.-Canada border is creating friction and anxiety, potentially altering the fundamental nature of this historically close relationship. The changes are subtle for some, stark for others, but undeniably present, leaving many Canadians to wonder about the future of travel to their southern neighbor. The border, once a symbol of partnership, now increasingly feels like a barrier reflecting a more complex and uncertain era in Canada-U.S. relations. Thank you for watching.